Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Now, our next guest is a historian, an author, and a lecturer. Now, for decades, he's been researching the conspiratorial view of history, the idea that the major events of the past have been planned years in advance, maybe even centuries in advance, by a central conspiracy. He's written best-selling books on the subjects, many of them. We're going to tweet links to his website and where you can find these books. Books including The Unseen Hand and Masonry, Conspiracy Against Christianity. Terrific to welcome to the programme Ralph Epperson. Ralph, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing fine, Richie. Thank you very much. I'm here in Tucson, Arizona. It's a crummy, cloudy day with rain. That's not much fun. But anyway, I'm here. I'm ready to go.
Good to have you on. And crummy and cloudy, but it's not always crummy and cloudy. It's a nice part of the world, Tucson, Arizona.
Oh, have you ever been here?
No, I'd love to. I've been to the east coast of the US, but I've always dreamed about doing the old Route 66, travelling to southern states, heading out towards Arizona and then Nevada. I'd love it. I'd love to be there, yeah. Evocative of all those great books, Norman Mailer, all these great authors, all the films, of course. Yeah, it looks great, Ralph. Maybe I'll come and visit you someday.
Happy to have you. Just call me and let me know.
Yeah, and that's true too. I'll hold you to that. Now, before we talk about how you got into writing about the things you've been writing about, our listeners are dying to know what you think about the inauguration this week, what you think about Donald Trump. Where does he fit into the grand scheme of things and the overall conspiracy? What do you make of Trump?
Well, we'll start with that. I can't, even today, with only less than a week to go before he's inaugurated, I can't determine whether he's legitimate or not. We don't know. So let me say, I'll give you a little background. I first got involved with this battle of discussing and learning about the conspiratorial view of history back in the 1960s when I worked as a volunteer in the Goldwater campaign. I voted for Barry Goldwater. But later on, shortly thereafter, I started to discover that both political parties are controlled by the same people. And I was going to discuss that in a minute, if you wish.
Of course.
To prove it. So then I realized that I couldn't vote for a Democrat or Republican because it doesn't matter. It's like a wrestling match. The promoter decides which guy's going to win and which guy's going to lose in advance. And then they perform and we scream our heads off and believe it's real. That's what we've had for 60 years. But anyway, this posed a real problem for me because I really thought that Donald Trump was legitimate. I was hoping, in fact, I'm still hoping he is. I can't determine yet because he hasn't proven it yet. I'll give you something to think about for you. Maybe, I presume you live in England, is that correct?
That's right, Ralph. Yeah, I'm in the north-west of England in Manchester.
Okay. A thing that I learned probably 50 years ago was a one-liner. One way they look, another way they steer. We have to remember it doesn't matter what he says, it's what he does.
Yeah.
One way they look, I'm going to give you A, B, C, D, and then one way they steer to E, F, G, and H. So this is the problem. I believe that Donald Trump so far is legitimate with, I'll give you one piece of evidence. I checked the listing on the Council on Foreign Relations on the internet, and that is one of the major groups that controls this nation. They're down lower in the hierarchy, but if you want to get anywhere in this world, you got to join the CFR. And so far, the first 13 of his cabinet positions were not, I repeat, not members of the CFR. Now, that's a good beginning. But once again, it could all be about show. So the next step will be, of course, what he does with the executive orders. That'll be a good clue. If he's legitimate, he's going to eliminate what Barack Obama's been doing without constitutional authority. And then the next step will be the Supreme Court justice. But the Supreme Court justice that he will appoint will be a conservative, because Scalia was a conservative, and they want to get back to the 5-4 liberal majority. The next one will be the key, because if it's a liberal, he's going to, if he appoints a liberal, then we know he's part of the process and not part of the solution. So until until these things happen, I'm still holding my opinion that maybe, just maybe, he's legitimate and he really will do what he needs to do to save this country.
By the way, it's Ralph-Epperson.com. We've just tweeted that out there, by the way, and we'll retweet it again. That's where you're going to find Ralph. Ralph, you know, you don't have to be Lieutenant Columbo to think that the assassination of President John Kennedy must have had a big impact on your development and your research back in the 60s.
Yes, it's just interesting that you mentioned that, because I've been just looking into it. You know, I've been looking into it for 50 years probably. But let's point out, there's a quote that I had never heard before from him, and I've even actually got it quoted here, if you just give me a minute, because it boggles the mind, because I have never heard this until maybe a year ago. But he said it in 1961. John Kennedy, it's just one sentence. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. That quote would have changed my opinion of John Kennedy. Well, I'd have to do more, but at least start the process. Maybe he was legitimate as well. That's an amazing concession on his part, a confession, if you will. He actually said that. You can hear it yourself if you go to his website, his library, and you can read the words yourself. So if I had known that, it would have changed my opinion. I probably still would have voted for Goldwater, because I had read some of his books and was believing in what he had to say. So I had a real problem with deciding to vote for him, because he's, quote, a Republican, but he's not. He's anti-Republican. He's, I believe, a real patriot. But once again, one way they look, another way they steer.
This is interesting stuff, Ralph. I'm loving this. By the way, you know, around about that time, of course, it wasn't, when Kennedy said that about secrecy, which is a brilliant quote, and I'm delighted you brought it up. I hadn't heard that quote for a long time. But it wasn't long after the outgoing president, Dwight D. Eisenhower, gave his famous military-industrial complex speech, which might be, you know, arguably one of the most, if not the most important speeches ever given by a president, because he basically laid it out, didn't he? This is what's going on. You know, the military-industrial complex is basically in the process of taking over the country.
Well, if I may, can we discuss that? Because I have a differing opinion.
Yes, of course. Go ahead. I'm fascinated, Ralph.
Please, that's quite all right. Thank you very much. Let me ask you this, Richie. What role does the government play in the military-industrial complex?
Now, I would have said, as a former commercial radio presenter and producer, I would have said the government's role is in giving out contracts to the companies.
Well, yeah, but that, even then, that's part of they're in the process.
Right.
Let me say this, Richie. Please understand, I'm going to try to prove that statement that Eisenhower made is a bold-faced lie, and he knew it was a lie. Let me tell you how we know that. It's really a government industrial complex that uses the military to get to their goals. Let me prove that to you. You might remember that way back in the towards the middle or the end of the World War II, Eisenhower was Supreme Allied Commander, and he was in England, getting the army ready to attack and go through France to defeat the Germans. And President Franklin Roosevelt learned that he was having an affair with his chauffeur, a woman by the name of Kay Summersby. He learned about this and said if this ever got out into the media, this would be a disaster for his cause. And he ordered him to come back, Eisenhower, to come back to the United States and be seen with Mamie out in public, that everything's fine. And he was ordered to transfer Kay out of his unit. So he did that. He came back to the United States and then returned, of course, after he'd satisfied the media that he and his wife were okay. Secondly, General MacArthur wanted to bomb the bridges over the Yalu River in the Korean War when he was the Supreme Allied, or the equivalent of the leading general over there, and he was ordered by Truman not to do that, and he was going to do it anyway. Truman called him and ordered him to come to Hawaii. And when he got to Hawaii, Truman fired him. Now, wait a minute. How could he fire if it's a military industrial complex? MacArthur would say, listen, stick it in your ear. We're in charge, not you. You obey my orders. I don't obey yours. But he didn't do that. He came back and was fired because it's a government industrial complex that uses the military. One more example. There's a bunch of work out on the career of General Smedley Butler.
Yes.
Smedley Butler was at the time this nation's probably most popular high-ranking general. And Smedley Butler was ordered constantly to go down to Latin America with his troops to bail out dictators or force them to make the payments back to the banks that had loaned these dictators in Latin America money, and they wouldn't pay back. So Smedley Butler said this is a misuse of his things and made it public. And, of course, he was ordered. He went. He could have said to the president, stick in your ear, I'm not going. But he went because the commander-in-chief of the military, and every general knows this, is the president of the United States. And just one more little incidental evidence of that. You'll notice, you probably see it on your television over there in England, you'll notice when Barack Obama walks back to the helicopter, the Marine, I presume it is, standing at the little walkway, the stairway, gives him a salute, and Barack Obama salutes him back.
Yeah.
Barack Obama's a civilian. No, he's commander-in-chief. He's the number one general. Generals salute Barack Obama. So keep it in mind. It's a military industrial complex that uses the military to achieve their goals.
You said, I don't want, there's so much to get into, there's so much to talk about in the next half an hour, 35 minutes, that I don't want to waste too much time nitpicking. But it was still, I mean, you said it was a bold-faced lie by Eisenhower, but it was still a powerful thing to say, though, because it at least gave people, you know, it gave people clues, didn't it? Even if, and by the way, I agree with you. Of course, it's the commander-in-chief and the cabinet and those around him who make these decisions to go to war and bomb the hell out of, you know, poor people in third world countries. But still, why did Eisenhower do that then?
Okay, I'll tell you why.
You might
remember the McCarthy days of Senator Joseph McCarthy. I covered this all in The Unseen Hand. I got probably the best review of the McCarthy era is in my book, The Unseen Hand. I wrote in 1985. Let's go back. McCarthy learned that there was really a conspiracy, and he learned it from James Forrestal, who was there at the Yalta, Tehran, and Potsdam conferences to end World War II. And there he learned how our government built the Iron Curtain. They sat down and on paper with Stalin, decided which countries would be communist and which would not be communist, and Forrestal saw that as a problem and told Senator McCarthy that there were communists in our government. Now, as long as you look down into the Communist Party and the meetings of the Communist Party in the basement with the smoke, then you're hailed as a great American patriot. But he found McCarthy found the link between the communists and the government. That means Eisenhower. Eisenhower had communists surrounding him. And when he found that, Eisenhower, as you'll read in The Unseen Hand, sat down with the people that determined we had to get McCarthy. And to throw the people off of the trail between the conspiracy and the Communist Party, he came up with this military-industrial complex, which means we're supposed to be looking that way and not the real way. And that's what it was for, in my opinion.
This is
great,
In other
words,
Ralph.
He was throwing us off the scent, which is the government controls communism, and I was going to prove that today as well.
Well, you know, the book's The Unseen Hand. I've had a tweet from Mark Atwood who wants to thank you because the Unseen Hand, which was published in 1985, Mark says that was the book that got him on the road to researching what's going on. So that's a lovely tweet, that. We've got Ralph Epperson on the line. The New World Order, The Unseen Hand, amongst these books. We've tweeted his website where you can find it. It's exactly 21 minutes past the hour, lots to get into. Now, You know, because you've been doing this for years and years and years and years and years. Men and women, our friends, our neighbours, our family, Ralph, they shake their head in disbelief when people like you, and when I say people like me, I've not done the research you've done. I'm a reporter, but I've spoken to people like you for years, and I agree with much of what you have to say. So I would agree that, long planned by an international conspiracy, they shake their heads, don't they, Ralph? They can't get their heads around that. It doesn't compute with them. How could that be possible? How do you go about explaining that to people?
Because this conspiracy is real and it's been active in this country since it was founded. This country was set up by the founding fathers to fail, and I'm now proving that as well. In fact, you can now go, there's 3 different radio interviews I've done, all on the internet, in which I discuss the evidence that our founding fathers gave Congress total unlimited power, which means they're operating with that even today in the United States. They have total unlimited power given to them by the founding fathers.
How did they do that now? Not to interrupt you. And by the way, this is a live radio program with the biggest independent media audience in Europe, and you're here to explain that. How did the founding fathers, what decisions did they make in order to make the country fail, to give all that power to Congress, and whom were they acting on behalf of? Okay, let's take it step by step. Let's do the first how. Anyone can verify this, and it was done by your English Parliament in 1766. It's called the Declaratory Act. Declaratory, D-E-C-L-A-R-A-T-O-R-Y, Declaratory Act, which gave King George, as you will read with your own eyes, the power to bind the people and colonies of America with the power to legislate in all cases whatsoever. That means all. Words have meaning. We know what the word meant, just like you knew what the word meant. Your parliament knew all meant all. There's no limit to the power granted to King George in the Declaratory Act of 1766. We lived under that law for 10 years. In 1776, when we declared our independence, the reason we did was because of the Declaratory Act. And you will read in the Declaration of Independence that our founding fathers said that your king, because we in America were English subjects as well, he had the power to suspend our legislatures and declare his own legislators with the power to legislate in all cases whatsoever, which means our founding fathers knew precisely about the Declaratory Act. They used the same 4 words, in all cases whatsoever. There's no question. This was the reason we declared our independence. Now, we in America have been lied to and told it was taxation without representation. Wrong. I've covered this way back in 85. It's been estimated that the gross taxes of the English government on America was less than 1%. We're now paying 50%, and we're not objecting. So that's not the reason. The Declaration of Independence says it's clearly the fact that it's created an absolute tyranny. The word tyranny still is defined as total power. Now, 11 years later, we wrote the Constitution. We divided the power, but when we created the Congress, we delegated the power in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, to give Congress the power to legislate in all cases whatsoever. You cannot ignore this. It's right there in front of us and has been there for 200 years. The power to legislate in all cases whatsoever means exactly that. Means all means all. Now, I touched on this, Ralph. I touched on this a minute ago. I touched on it when I said acting on behalf of whom. And I want to go back to that because you spoke about the Commander-in-Chief and how he, of course, has supreme authority over the military. And, of course, you're right. You don't need me to tell you you're right. You've been researching this for decades. But you are right, of course. But now we come to the hidden hand. Who is appointing these people? You spoke very eloquently earlier on about it being a rigged game. You mentioned wrestling as a brilliant analogy. The result has been predetermined. By who?
Well, this is the toughest question to answer because, once again, a conspiracy is defined as people with an evil purpose who work in secret, and two or more people. That's the problem. A conspiracy works in secret. We've got to dig it out. Now, I've been digging this thing out by reading well over 1,100 different titles on this subject, as many as I can by anyone who writes on either side. I'll give you a beginning clue. We can know a little bit about it. Now, I don't know whether you people in England carry dollar bills around, but we in America use it as our currency. And on the back of the dollar bill, there's two circles. And we'll make this as brief as I can. If we go to the left-hand side of the circle and the pyramid, maybe people, I presume England, you know what our dollar bill looks like?
Yes.
So you know, okay. So
Yeah.
you know there's a pyramid, and then there's Latin words above it and below it. And they read Annuit Septis Novos Ordo Seclorum. Annuit means announcing or the announcement of. Septis is the Latin word for conception, meaning the birth of, announcing the birth of, the Novos Ordo Seclorum. Novos, new, Ordo, order, Seclorum, world. Now, in my dictionary, and probably even in yours, there's a word called secular, which is defined as government with no God. That's what we got. The New World Order will be a government without God. Now, who gave us the New World Order? In our that design was created in 1782, 5 years before we even created our own constitution. So they were creating this nation to announce the birth of the New World Order. Now, let's take the next step. If you go to the other side, there's a eagle, and the eagle's kind of flat with his wings outspread, but above it is what they call a burst. And a burst contains, if you'll notice, it's hard to see because it's kind of small, but there's a 6-pointed star there made of 13 5-pointed stars. So if you draw the lines to make the 6-pointed star, ignoring the star in the center, you'll have a pyramid facing down and a pyramid facing up. And if you pick that up and lay it down on the other side of the seal, on top of it, you'll notice if you lay it down with the top line of the pyramid looking down, underneath, or be actually on top of the pyramid, and then the bottom line will be the bottom of the second pyramid pointing up. You'll notice that 5 of the 6 points point to letters. Now, of course, there's a space between Annuit and Septis. So I'll use a clock. At 10 o'clock, that point points to an A, and then we got a blank, and then the 2 o'clock points to an S, and then down at 8 o'clock it points to an N in Novus. The 6 o'clock points to the second O in Ordo, and the 4 o'clock points to the M. A-S-N-O-M. A-S-N-O-M. Now there's a word in, I presume, the English language as well, called anagram. An anagram is the scrambling of the letters to conceal the real word. A-S-N-O-M is an anagram for M-A-S-O-N. Do you see that? The Masons were concealing the fact that they set this nation up. The Masons. Now, we just read where John Kennedy said, beware the groups that are secret with secret oaths and secret proceedings. Guess who has secret oaths, secret proceedings, and secret meetings?
Masonic
the
lodges.
Masons.
Yeah.
Yes. That's a good beginning. Now, of course, that's very hard to convince anyone who's just away. I've been a Mason for 50 years, but I'm telling you, that's where we are. Let me give you a couple of clues. On the cover, I think it's on the inside page of my book, The New World Order, it says, Masonry is the most powerful organization in the land. Huh? The most? Second to none, yes. It is an ordainer of kings. Its hand has shaped the destinies of worlds. This was written by, these two quotes in two different books were written by one of the leading Masons of all time, a man by the name of Manly P. Hall, who wrote voluminously on the secret of not only the Masons, but of the ancient mystery religion, you name it. He's a very voluminous and also, by the way, a 33rd degree Mason. So this man, if anyone knew about the Masons, it's Manly Palmer Hall. The most powerful organization in the land. The most powerful organization in the land can set it up as they did, as we just saw, with the anagram of the word Mason concealed around the Great Pyramid on our Great Seal of the United States.
28 minutes to the top of the hour. Ralph Epperson is on the line. Ralph-Epperson.com is the website. Now, there were more than just the Masons in terms of secret societies. We talk a lot about Zionism. Zionism is basically a secret society. And we talk about the banking cartels. Where do the banking cartels, in your opinion, the banking families, the House of Rothschild, the Rockefellers, the Warburgs, the Oppenheimers, in your opinion, where did they fit into this?
Well, Kurt, let's take it step by step. Let's go back to the Rothschilds. Many people believe the Rothschilds are the bankers that control the world. Wrong. Let me give you a little evidence. Bill Clinton in 1992, when he was accepting the Democrat national nomination, gave a speech which was covered by, at that time, 3 major networks and maybe CNN, I don't know, but at least all networks were, you couldn't watch Roxanne anymore or I Dream of Jeannie because you had to watch the president. In that speech, he told America with his own mouth that there was an international conspiracy at work in the world and that it controlled all of the governments, the economies of the world through central banks. And then he praised a doctor by the name of Carroll Quigley. Carroll Quigley, who was a professor, as Clinton said, at Georgetown University when Bill Clinton went to school there. So in 1966, Quigley published this book called Tragedy and Hope. Now, it's a very boring, tedious work. If you want to know what's in that book, you can get the essence of it in a little DVD I've got on the internet called Bill Clinton's Conspiracy. Find it and watch it, and you'll learn what Bill Clinton, by documentation, what Bill Clinton was taught by Dr. Carroll Quigley. In that book, he named 12 banking families, not just the Rothschilds, 11 more. Now, I'll be honest with you, I've been researching this thing for 50 years. When I read that list, I recognized 3 and only 3 of those names. Rothschild, Morgan, and the third was, I've forgotten, I think it was the Slegmans. Other than that, I've never heard of those other 9. They're buried. But Quigley found them because he claimed he'd been made privy to the papers of the conspiracy when he was working before he got his PhD at Harvard. So he wrote the book, the Tragedy and Hope, and admitted there were 12 banking families, and he claimed he found that material in their, quote, secret papers, unquote. Now, secondly, let me point out to you, this conspiracy that I've discovered is not just new. It's not 2,000 years old. It's 6,000 years old, which predates everything. And I want to, well, this opens up, and boy, this is going to, if I say this is going to need 4 hours to cover it. But this thing bears its foundation on a belief in Satan, Lucifer, the devil. He said, it's impossible. I just said it takes 4 hours to cover that. But if you want to see it and read about it, it's in my second book called The New World Order. And if you want to read The Unseen Hand first, then read The New World Order. And I'm telling you, you'll learn about this worship of Satan, which is worldwide and 6,000 years old. There's no question it's real.
Now, this is where... You see, I think this is absolutely brilliant, and I'm not patronising you. I think it's fantastic. I'm going to be the petulant younger man who's not researched as much as you, and I'm going to put a couple of points to you where I slightly disagree. You mentioned these banking families in Zionism. You see, I would ask you to tell me why today in 2017, we've just turned 2017, Jewish Americans make up, and by the way, I'm not David Duke here or any of these people. I'm not in any way, hateful of Jews. I'll explain myself. Jewish Americans make up less than 2% of the country. And from what I can understand, Ralph, most Jewish Americans are not Zionists, and they don't subscribe to or support the racist, horrible ideology of Zionism. Yet, throughout recent history, your country's administrations have been filled to the brim with what we would call Rothschild Zionists. And I would go a step further. If you look at the royal families of the world, the royal families of Europe, and anybody with a computer can have a look. These families, these banking families, these arch Zionists, interbreed and intermarry with the royal families of Europe, and that's going way back. So I would say that that's incredibly significant, that too, in terms of the overall conspiracy. What do you think?
Well, let's just examine that. I want to point out to you that I've read materials on the Zionist conspiracy repeatedly for 60 years, and I'm not convinced it is, and I'll tell you why. The Rothschilds are not Jews. Now, wait a minute.
I agree.
They're not Jews. I'll give you a good example. Let me give you a good example. Karl Marx, the father of communism in the 1840s or so, his father he was born in a Jewish family of a Jewish mother and father. He was a member, I presume, of the synagogue locally, and his father was a civil servant. And his father decided that, apparently, this is a presumption, I've never read this, but anyway, his father became a Christian. And I believe the reason he did so, this is a theory, was because he realized in those years that he couldn't get promoted because he was Jewish. So he said, I'm going to change and become a Christian. Well, Karl Marx read that information. He read the Bible. Karl Marx accepted Jesus as his Savior. Karl Marx actually was baptized into the Christian faith, but then he went to college. And when he went to college, I don't know where, he went to college, he admits in his own writings that he got involved with a satanic cult led by a priestess named Joanna Southcott, who claimed to be in touch with a demon named Shiloh. And that's when she taught Karl Marx that Christianity was wrong, there was no Jesus, and that the world that Christianity has created was chaos, and that we had to leave the world and change all that, and that he should become a communist. And that's when he wrote the manifesto and became a communist. But notice what he did. He went from being a Jew to a Christian to a Luciferian, a Satanist. Karl Marx was a Satanist. If you read about Adolf Hitler was a Satanist. He got involved with a group called the Thule, Thule, you pronounce it as you will, Thule Society, and you can read the writings in several of the books about Adolf Hitler, that he embraced what he learned in the Thule Society. And there was a man by name, I better be careful, I was going to name him, but I'm not sure at the moment, I can't remember his name. But he said that people will look at Adolf Hitler, but it is I who controls him. And that man was a Luciferian. So let's go back to the Rothschilds.
Can I ask you a question? Can I ask a quick question on that? This is really good, Ralph. I don't want to be interrupting you.
No, go ahead.
You're absolutely right, of course, to say that the Zionists are not Jewish. Of course not. I would believe, and I do believe, that they were a secret society, and through that, they set up much of what you've already described. But I want to just make one point. I've come to learn over the last few years through reading several researchers and books and watching several presentations. It's incredible to me and brilliant to me that you talked about going back 6,000 years ago. We know through the Gnostic writings that there was a massive change in our, I suppose, in our lives, in our experience on Earth about 6,000 years ago. And could I put it to you that the Satanists that you described, and again, I wouldn't argue with that, I think you're absolutely bang on, that what they were worshipping were what the Gnostics talked about, the jinn or the archon entities, these interdimensional energies. and that they began to manipulate and distort their perception. And it's these entities that work through the Zionists and the Masons and these other secret societies that have perverted everything. Christianity, whether you believe in Jesus or not, but the teachings of Christianity are fundamentally sound and are wonderful. Do you not see that that's a very, very strong possibility? The Gnostics and the Archons.
Well, I unfortunately don't know much about that, but I will say this just in response. Even Jesus talked about this when he was talking to the Pharisees. I think it was the Sadducees. He said, "You are of your father, the devil." Now, these were the leaders of the Jewish faith. Now, that means that there was a conspiracy inside of Judaism. This conspiracy has infiltrated Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, you name it. And Jesus was one of those who admitted it. He admitted, you people are at the very top, worship Satan, your father. They called him Satan the devil. So you are of your father the devil. Now that means that they've infiltrated even Judaism. So like the Rothschilds have to denounce their Jewish history to become Luciferians. If they decide to go back to Judaism, they're not going to be around anymore. This conspiracy is 6,000 years old, and it's based totally on a belief in Satan, the devil, that goes all the way back to the Egyptians, when it was first started. And I can trace it back in their own literature that it's 6,000 years old. This is even
right.
Albert Pike talked
Ralph,
about them,
Ralph,
connecting it back.
Your books are, listen, I'm going to mention again, you're absolutely right. Nobody could argue what I just said there. It's 100% right. I'm just throwing out the suggestion that what they thought was Satan, what they were worshipping, was in fact something maybe different. But that in no way contradicts what you've said there. It's absolutely brilliant stuff. I want to mention it's Ralph-Epperson.com. Unseen Hand is the New World Order. We mentioned other books that Ralph has written. If you put his name into YouTube, you'll find all the videos. Again, we'll tweet those links out so that you can find those videos and watch more and hear more of Ralph a bit later on. I'm delighted you're on the program, Ralph. It won't be the last time we talk, I don't think. Thanks for doing it. Ralph is in Tucson, Arizona right about now. I've got to ask you this, right? It's a boring question, but I must ask it. How, in the name of all that's important, do you get somebody who is not willing to consider this? How do you introduce this to people, Ralph?
Well, it's very simple, and I say this, I've said this, of course, this applies to America. I've said this, if we don't convince middle America, the average American, the man who works 8-10 hours a day and's got a wife who also works, the kids are going to high school, and he goes to the high school football games and bowls in the Monday Night League and does all these things. If we don't convince him that there's something wrong in America, we lose the country. This country is on the verge and could go at any moment totally out to the New World Order. In fact, in my second book, actually, I predicted the date. I wrote it in 1990. I predicted the date 2000, the New World Order was supposed to start, and it didn't start. But I didn't predict it. I covered it as an historian. I found that was the date, and it didn't happen. We'd have to talk about that to explain what did happen and where I found it. But I can assure you that was their official date. The 1st of January of the year 2000, the New World Order was supposed to start. I covered that, documented. It's in my New World Order. I covered it in a tour of the United States in 1985 to 87 with my first book. I spoke in 91 cities in 31 states talking about the coming New World Order in the year 2000. Not that I was predicting it or even prophesying it. I was saying this is what this conspiracy wants. Well, it didn't happen. So I'm saying we are in trouble, and if we don't convince the average American, we lose the country. And when America goes, notice it's a new world. It's going to be worldwide. It's not just us. England's going to fall. The rest of the world, we're all going to live under a new world order.
Unless people wake up to it. Now, you did mention at the very beginning of the chat, we talked a little bit about Trump. Just to reiterate, you did kind of say earlier on that, again, to be fair to you, you said that at the moment the jury is out with Trump. But from what you've been saying, Ralph, it leans towards Trump is just going to be another easily manipulated and easily controlled president by those that we've been talking about, right?
Well, see, once again, remember what I said.
Yeah.
One way they look, another way they steer. please understand, I'm quite aware of that, and I didn't quite finish my thought. So when I came to deciding how to vote in this election, I've always voted since Goldwater for a third party. I have not voted for one Democrat or one Republican, but I voted every 4 years for president. And I've always voted for a third party. But I had a problem because I supported what Trump was saying he wanted to do, because what he wants to do is save this country. And of course, we know that the establishment in the Republican Party doesn't want him to do that. The media in this country doesn't want him to be elected. So he's up against all that. So once again, he's in a very precarious position. If he's legitimate, he's going to maybe save this country. Now, he's going to find opposition every time he turns around, even within his own party, meaning, and especially the Democrats. They're going to oppose everything this man does. So we, the people, have got to instruct our congressmen and senators, we want you to do what Trump wants to do to save this country. Now, whether or not he does remains to be seen. As I told you, I'm still open. I'm hedging my bet. I'm praying that he's right and we'll get a chance to do it, and that the people in this country will understand. Let me make one more comment. Something like 60% of the American people sense there's something wrong in America. And they're right. Something is wrong in America.
So, Ralph,
but they don't know why it's wrong.
Well, see, this is brilliant
my job
now.
To show them there's a conspiracy.
And Gerald Salente was on the program in the first hour, and I put this question to him, and I'll put it to you, and we're going to run out of time in about 4 minutes. So it doesn't really matter if Trump turns out to be another, banking and big business controlled stooge, because ultimately you think that the lid has been lifted off now. People are horrified, they are hurt, they are disgusted by the media and everything else. And if they find out that they've been duped by Trump, they're not going to be disappointed and just return back to their homes and continue to take the crap, excuse my language. You think that this is a good thing, that there's something big coming, right? They're standing up, and even if they're misguided in supporting Trump, it doesn't matter, that the lid is off, basically, right?
Yes, but once again, if Trump is controlled by the Congress and or the media, what we're going to get is we're going to get Hillary 2A.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter. As I said, both parties are controlled by the same people. That means that the people, even in the Republican Party, are controlled at the very top layers, and they worked very hard, and they're still working very hard to stop Trump. That's a clue that maybe the man's legitimate, but it could also be, as you pointed out, maybe the goal is for us, those of us who supported him are going to be very disappointed and get very angry, and maybe we'll go out in the streets and demand that this change. I don't know. That could be, that's one of the dangers of this whole thing, and I'm quite aware of it. I know that they tried to manipulate us to get out in the streets, anyone, either our side or the left, to control and cause riots and everything else, to demand change, and they might want to impose martial law. I don't know. I'm certainly aware of that. I'm praying, as I said, and I ask people on Facebook to pray that Donald Trump is legitimate, and it's time to let him do what he wants to do and encourage our senators and congressmen to go along with it.
Ralph, will you do us a favour? Will we pick this up again in February, and will we do a longer segment? The programme lasts about 2 hours, so we could do 90 minutes or an hour 45. Because I wasn't being arrogant earlier on when I said the size of the audience. It is massive. And an enormous amount of questions came in during the conversation. I did get to most of them, but I think our listeners would love to hear from you again in more depth on another program. If you were up for that, we'd be thrilled to have you back on. You're very kind, Rick. Let me point out one thing. People can go to eBay. Everyone, I presume, knows what that is. You can get on the computer, go to eBay, type in The Unseen Hand, and read the 7 reviews. And please trust me, I did not write those. I didn't pay people to write them. In fact, I didn't even know there was an eBay until a couple of years ago. Somebody said, you got to read the reviews on eBay. Please do that. And you're going to see people like saying, this is the best history book I've ever read. These people say, every American should read The Unseen Hand. You said one of your listeners, I guess in the chat room or wherever it is, talked about how it got him started. That's right, Mark, yeah. You can't know the number of people who write to me or call me
then say the same thing. You've changed my whole life because of the unseen hand. Please read that book. Now, I want.
I couldn't have made a better ad than that, by the way. That's an outstanding ad, by the way. I couldn't have made one better myself.
Well,
I say tongue in cheek. No, I listen, I'm happy for you to promote it. I've mentioned it. We've tweeted where people can get it. Unseen Hand, The New World Order, the other books we mentioned at the top of the show. I'm going to give you the final word because we're rapidly running out of time. We've got 30 seconds. You've the final word, and then Claire and you will chat, and we'll get you booked in February for the entire show, and we'll have a proper conversation. Last 30 seconds to you, Ralph, and thanks again.
Oh, thank you, Richie. No, I just want to say, please understand, I've spent my life, adult life, discovering the evidence, documented evidence, that there is a conspiracy, and they're working to change our civilization. That's where we are. So I would urge your listeners to get involved and join me in a crusade to stop it. That's that simple.
Wonderfully said, and a great way to leave our chat today. Ralph-Epperson.com is the website. All good online retailers, including eBay, but all good online retailers do have Ralph's books. Check them out, and we will do this again in February. Ralph, enjoy the rest of your day there. I hope the clouds part there in Tucson, Arizona, and thanks so much for your time. I've really loved talking to you.
You're my pleasure, Richie. Thank you for the opportunity.
It was an honour. Bye for now, and thanks to Jean-Anne Crowley, our friend in Dublin, who recommended we get Ralph on the programme, and Claire for organising it. Great stuff. We've a good team here at this programme. I might get the plaudits sitting here enjoying conversations with people like Ralph, but we have a team here.